Continuing the Sundered builds, today we're going to look again at the Infinity Amazon and how it compares to the more popular Javazon, and how we end up using both along the way until we transition to the Infinity Amazon in the end. And while there are advantages to running true Javazons, I think with the introduction of Sundered, as well as several of the changes that happened in 2.4, we're reaching a point where the farming advantage of the Javazon is getting whittled down, especially with the inclusion of the desire to farm terror zones. Starting out though, it's worth acknowledging both the builds have their pros and their cons, with Javazons being much more budget friendly and stronger in truly monster dense areas like the cow level, while the Infinity Amazon tends to perform better as a boss killer, as well as a farming low to moderately dense areas throughout the game where Fury cannot take full advantage of its piercing bursts. In normal difficulty especially, if we're going without resetting our stats and skills, they both will play very similar and can actually be taken through the end of Nightmare using the original starter javelins if you really want to. That's because this build is almost entirely based on your skill selections, much like various caster builds. The main difference is you have to get closer to the enemies, so you probably do want to double up on getting your survival gear squared away. In normal, this will be things such as the usually recommended stealth armor, which you can get the runes for from normal Countess farming pretty easily, and then just shop a 2-socket armor from Charcy in Act 1 or Farah in Act 2. Lore is also, again, pretty handy for this build thanks to the lightning resist and +1 skills, which, due to being skill-based, is a very useful boon for boosting your damage output, though you will tend to only get this near the end of normal or early Nightmare. Another extremely handy piece of gear if you can get a Shale rune in late normal or early Nightmare is Rhyme. This is because we're going to be using our attack animations rather than casting, which are unfortunately impacted by being chilled. So picking up a 2-socket kite shield from Farah or a 2-socket bone or spike shield from Drognin in normal is usually something nice to pocket away. While you wouldn't go Ancient's Pledge with this, you will miss out on the Cannot Be Frozen if you go that way. So I tend to only use those on casters usually. Stat-wise, same as usual, enough strength and dexterity for gear and the rest into vitality, though since we are going to be using spears and javelins throughout our journey, it's fine to invest a little extra into the strength and dexterity along the way if your life total is feeling good at the time, since we will need a decent amount to equip most of our endgame options, regardless of whether you're going Javazon or Spearzon. Now, as said, skills are where it's all at, and sadly until level 18 you're going to be hurting quite a bit, with your first few levels just sitting on points for the most part since most of your big investment skills are that level 18 and up. So I usually just get my prerequisites for Charge Strike, drop points in the evasion skills, and start working my way towards Valkyrie on the passive tree, since early on you'll pretty much just be using Inner Sight and whatever pokey skill you prefer. While it can make life easier to go down the right side of the passive tree with Critical Strike and Penetrate improving your chance to hit, if you already have an Infinity Spear waiting for you, I'd go ahead and skip them, since we won't need it to hit later to actually get most of our damage out. But if you don't have Infinity, going down to Pierce to run a more traditional Javazon is still not a terrible idea, and we will cover both of them as we get into the Hell stuff. At level 18 though, which you'll start to see in Act 2 or 3, we want to dump into Charge Strike. This is a powerhouse skill that's okay for swarms but amazing for bosses. If you have spare points and want to get synergies before level 30, I would go with Lightning Bolt rather than Power Strike since it has more utility. This means you'll generally be leaving Power Strike at level 1 until you have all of your other synergies squared away. This should get you into Nightmare fairly easily, which means we now need to start working our way through that difficulty, and by then you should have a fairly high level, if not max, Charge Strike, and have started investing in your second skill, which is a bit of a toss-up as to which you want to do, since if you're going Javazon, you go a bit into Pierce and then dump into Lightning Fury, but realize that it does not provide a boost to Charge Strike anymore, though it does get boosts from all of our normal synergies in this setup. So you're basically sacrificing a bit of boss killing speed in favor of better crowd killing speed. If you're going to lean hard into the Infinity Amazon though, instead of Lightning Fury, you'll invest in Lightning Strike. This is a chain lightning style skill that, while less effective against crowds like cows, will actually do fairly reasonably against more moderately dense groups like you'll find in various areas of the game, and be able to stay relatively competitive with Lightning Fury. Gear-wise, not much will be different between these builds in Nightmare. You will still want to stick with Javelin and Shield for your progression here, just for the extra personal durability, since you likely won't have the rest of your gear up and running throughout. So stay focused on that resist, make sure you cannot get frozen, that's one of the most important things, and if you can nab it, get some mana per kill or an insight mercenary. They both will be extremely helpful here. And if you continued moving down to get a point in Valkyrie, she will help decoy enemies away from your mercenary so you can keep that mana recovery. It is also worth noting, Nightmare is a prime spot to farm for Titans, which is the favored Javazon weapon, and it can be super handy with its auto replenish, plus skills, and a few other nice perks. Though as we start running into lightning immunes, this setup will feel a little more mediocre whenever it comes to progression, though this will sadly be true of the entire build until we can get our chase gear. This is one reason why getting critical strike and penetrate are extra handy for progression if you don't have any of that gear waiting for you, since these, combined with jab and inner sight, can still make a decent amount of work on most immunes. And these immunes will become a lot more common in Hell, and you'll start to see many of the frustrations with the Javazon for progression. And while I will cover a hybrid build that's a lot better for this, in an upcoming video at least, it doesn't exploit the Sundered mechanic near as much as this one. So the only way we have to deal with it here is either avoid the lightning immunes or just use that jab trick and let our Mercenary and Valkyrie help carry us until we get our Infinity and such. Skill-wise, in Hell, we're going to continue pushing our synergies. If you went with Fury, your Fury and Charge Strike should be maxed. And from here, it's just going through Lightning Strike and Bolt to max those out for more synergies, then deciding whether you want a high-level Valkyrie, which can be handy for progression, or whether you want a higher damage Fury with the Power Strike synergy, which is a little slower for progression, but better for cows. And unfortunately, you will need to also spend extra points to get Pierce, and hopefully get that up to about 50% or higher between the skill and gear. If you went with the Lightning Strike and Charge Strike though, for a melee build, you have a little more wiggle room since you've made Charge Strike much stronger, faster with this setup. So you're a bit more free to invest in the synergies and still generally spend the last half of Hell just investing in Valkyrie since you only have 4 skills to max in the Spear tree rather than 5 like Fury. Either way, you will struggle with the lightning immunes if you didn't have gear waiting. For budget gear, it's pretty much just sticking with a ton of plus skills. Things like Spirit Shield will be very welcome and easy to get, it's just a matter of finding some budget runes and a Monarch. The rest should be focused on resist and such, though the Amazon armor piece is relatively cheap as well and can go with any 3-socket armor for quick plus skills, a random Valkyrie summon, and a few other nice mods for one of the easiest to make mid-tier rune word armors. But in the long run, the difference in gear is extraordinary, and there's pretty much 3 setups to look at, and they are the Fury Javazon, the Strike Javazon, and the Infinity Spearzon. With all of them, you'll want to get a decent attack speed boost from your gloves, which can be anything from laying of hands to proper rare or crafted plus skill, increased attack speed gloves like we have here. You can also get a decent boost from the amulet with the use of High Lord's Wrath, which is pretty much going to be your go-to pick if you need the attack speed, since it also gives us lightning resist to help offset the Sunder penalty. The last important thing in terms of attack speed is actually going to be in our rings, with Raven Frost for the Cannot Be Frozen, since Chill still does affect us pretty heavily regardless of which of these setups you use. Boots can be whatever you want. Resist will help though, but usually people go Magic Find. The other ring is usually Mana Leech if possible, of some sort, or plus skills from Stone of Jordan if you don't mind chugging mana potions or keeping an Insight Mercenary. Armor is either Enigma if you want to teleport, or Chains of Honor if you don't. Both are fine if you're focusing on Terror Zones though. And belt-wise, for melee, you'll use Thunder God's Vigor for its various nice perks for the build and its plus skills to your crowd control abilities. Though if you're going Fury, you might consider swapping it out for Razor Tail for the Pierce boost to get yourself closer, or even past the ever desirable 100% Pierce for it, to maximize the number of bolts you launch. The last piece of gear they all use, besides of course the usual plus skill charms, Torch, Annihilus, Resist Charms, etc., is going to be Griffins, an extremely rare and desirable helmet, usually socketed with a lightning rainbow facet, though I have seen some people putting Resistance Jewels of Fervor in their helmets, usually scintillating, though Ambergris would help offset the Sunder Charm a little bit as well. I still prefer the facet since it helps boost our damage a lot more than you would initially think. Now, where the builds diverge is in their choice of weapon and shield, and even mercenary to an extent, though that's pretty much just a question of who carries the Infinity. For both the Javazon versions, you'll end up using either Spirit Shield for plus skills, or a Rainbow Facet Shield, either Headhunter's Glory with 3 sockets, or Jeweler's Shielded Deflecting at the very top end. These are stronger than Spirit, but a lot more expensive and rare. Thankfully for both of them, their weapons are relatively cheap, with the Lightning Fury Amazon using Titans thanks to the auto-replenish and a lot of solid mods. The Strike Javazon that is melee kind of teeters between using Titans for areas where there are not lightning immunes, and using Thunderstroke in areas where there are lightning immunes. Since we are sundering them, this percent reduction in resist will help a ton in the damage output, whereas in non-lightning immune areas, we are already punching through enough that we'd rather have the plus skills from Titan. For both of these, you'll sadly really want to have your mercenary using Infinity, which means you will need to watch your mana because the extra 17% from it is pretty nice, and it makes it extra punchy. Though one advantage of both of these is that this is a support of an already useful setup, rather than part of the build's core equipment. Whereas the Infinity Spearzon, as you can tell by the name, is explicitly built around using this specific item, which yes, is a way you can design builds. The same goes for Dragondins, Riftsons, and Bear Sorceresses, heck, even Bowchantresses to a lesser extent. The advantage of this build, that even kind of makes up for the extreme loss of resistances, is that Infinity not only has Conviction, but has a built-in whopping 45 to 55% drop to enemy lightning resist on top of that. So with all of your gear, we're not only sundering the enemy to 95, but with Affinity alone, we are dropping them down to at most 33% lightning resist, and almost always much lower. Combine this with the plus skills on an Amazon-specific spear, and you'll be doing a lot more damage. Add on your choice of mercenary, whether an Insight mercenary for mana or a dual Plague Barbarian for even more piercing and tanking. You can actually net a fairly dangerous setup that rips through even commonly lightning immune areas. And all while we are glass cannon, unfortunately, most enemies will rarely survive long enough to care, even in areas where Fury traditionally does poorly. So, are you brave enough to use a two-handed spear on your Amazon, or do you prefer playing it safe with a smaller stick and shield approach? Mention it down below, and check out the video on screen now if you want to see a build that can exploit sundering while essentially naked. And if you want to see these videos a day early with no ads, check out the Patreon link as well.